This is George Farner with the series Another Look At. We're exploring Bible subjects, helping believers grow deeper in their faith. Today I want to talk about steps to growth or priorities. We're going to start out in Romans chapter 12, verse number 1. A lot of times I have heard people say before, I want to grow, or how do I grow? Or there's some expression of wanting to grow or mature beyond where they are. But there's not usually kind of a clear path. Today I want to share just a couple of really simple things that will help you in your growth and in your walk with the Lord. Verse number 1, Romans chapter 12, he says, "Therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your rational service of worship." One of the things that we see here is that he is talking about what we do with our bodies. Now, this is a simple area for us. When you're born again, when you're born from above, when you come to a place of faith in Jesus Christ, it's the person on the inside that's born again. It's 2 Corinthians 5, it talks about how we're made a new creature. But your body on the outside, even though its redemption has been paid for, is still not redeemed yet. And your body, even after you get saved, wants to continue to do things that aren't necessarily right. Your body is very conditionable. I know that's not really a word, but your body can be conditioned to adapt to certain things, to desire certain things. In this verse, he tells us, the Apostle Paul tells us what to do with our body. He says, "I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your rational or spiritual service of worship." First thing I want to look at here is in the very first part, he says, "I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God." A number of translations add the word aforementioned, by the aforementioned mercies of God. One translation says, "in light of the aforementioned mercies of God." What does he mean by aforementioned or aforementioned? He's talking about all the things he's discussed in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He comes to 12 and he says, wow, in the light of all these things, what should we do? Well, what we should do is we should present our bodies a living sacrifice. In other words, he's telling us as believers, I'm no longer going to allow my body to dictate to me what happens in life. Those temptations, those desires, those lusts, no. I am going to turn my body over to the service of God. Now, the second part of the verse, he says, present your body a living and holy sacrifice. One of the things that amuses me about the words here is they're a bit of an oxymoron, in that they're two terms that when you put them together make sense. Sometimes we joke and say, jumbo shrimp, or military intelligence or something like that. No offense to the military, just giving an example. But he says here, present your body a living sacrifice. Usually when something is sacrificed, it doesn't tend to survive. I mean, you wouldn't ask somebody after they were executed, so how did it go? No, it seems like it's almost a bit of a contradiction. But what he's saying is that there is a place and there's a time to tell your body, all right, you're being put to death as far as these things, and we are setting you aside for the purposes of God. And he says this is rational. This is your rational service or your spiritual worship. In other words, this is baseline Christianity. This is where it starts. And here's the step of growth that I really want to articulate clearly for you. And that is that spiritual things in your life must be made a priority if you're going to grow. It is a principle that appears throughout the Old Testament, the Gospels, the New Testament. In the Old Testament, we can see David in Psalm 119 say again and again, "O Lord, I put your commands first. Lord, your commands are my delight." In other words, he expresses them as a need, a necessity, a priority, something he's going to put first. Jesus did it too. He said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these other natural things will be added to you. Seek what first? Now, he didn't say only, but he said first, so he's establishing an order of priority. And here, Paul does the same thing in Romans. He says that spiritual things must come first, they must be prioritized, and physical or carnal or natural things must be subjugated or second place. So the first thing, we present our bodies a living sacrifice. Now, what's the second thing he says? Verse number 2, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good, perfect, and acceptable will of God." The world is constantly trying to conform us to its image. It's trying to press us into thinking a particular way, press us into being somebody in particular, to think like they think, to talk like they think, to value what they value. In Ephesians 2, Paul actually uses the term the course of this world. This world has a course. It follows a particular path, and it's a path that's godless. It's a path that's sinful. It's a path with skewed or evil values, and that conformity is always pushing on us. You must think like we do. But Paul says, no, we do it different. We present our bodies a living sacrifice, and then we change the way we think. Well, how do we change the way we think? Well, we get into our Bible. We begin to read, we begin to study, and we begin to change the way that we think so that we see things in a new way. We see them in a spiritual way. We see them according to the redemptive work of Jesus Christ. We change how we think. And then he says the next thing comes of that. He says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing or the changing of your mind, that you may prove or act out, live out, show to be what is the will of God. What is that good, perfect, and acceptable will of God? You want to live out the will of God in your life? You present your body a living sacrifice, you change the way that you think, and then you can come to the place where you're beginning to do what you really want to do on the inside. Those are the first two steps. Now, this is interesting because we're going to go on to verse number 3 here. For through the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each one a measure of faith. So the first thing he says is, present your body a living sacrifice. The second thing he says is, change the way that you think. That way you can prove out the will of God. The third thing he says then is so that you can evaluate yourself clearly. A lot of times people are trying to jump to number 3. I've been in churches for 40 years. I've been in ministry for over 40 years. And I always run into people that say things like, well, I believe the Lord has called me to this, or I believe the Lord has called me to that. And it usually has kind of a grandiose connotation to it, that I know where I'm supposed to go. And yet they're at a personal level, their lives still haven't found a place of stability. Paul talks about making that stability first. Present your bodies a living sacrifice. Don't be conformed to this world, but be changed in the way that you think. Prove out the will of God in your life. Now you can look at yourself and you can say, all right, where do I truly belong and what should I truly do? And even if you're really persuaded in your heart and mind, you know what you're called to do, whatever that may be, or what you believe the Lord has put in your heart, or however you want to express it. These 3 things are good things to put first because they do create a stability and a framework and a matrix for growth in your life, that your body becomes your servant, that your mind now thinks like the kingdom of God, that you're trying to prove out the will of God, and then you can think clearly about yourself. You can see where you belong. Because after this, in verses 4 through 8, Paul begins to talk about different gifts that are within the body, but it's really difficult to evaluate gifting or calling until you do the first couple things. So again, this is the first thing, one of the first principles of growth, and that is that you prioritize spiritual things. You put them first. You subjugate the body, you change the mind, you begin to prove the will of God, and then you can think clearly. I hope this helped you. I'm glad that you joined us again. And as it says in Ephesians 1, may the eyes of your understanding be enlightened. In Colossians 2, may you be rooted and established in the faith. Be blessed.